She had everything but the one thing her soul ached for: a child. In a society where a woman's worth was whispered through the laughter of sons and daughters, Hannah was a silence in a world of noise. Year after year, she stood at the edge of hope and despair, her heart raw from the torment of Peninnah, the other wife who flaunted her fertility like a crown. To be barren wasn't just a biological void, it was a spiritual sentence. Each jab from Peninnah wasn't just mockery, it was a reminder that even heaven had gone quiet. But Hannah didn't break. She bled faith in silence. And in that silence, something extraordinary began. She went to the tabernacle not as a woman full of religion, but as one emptied of everything but desperation. Her lips moved, but no words escaped. Not because she was drunk, as the old priest assumed, but because her grief was too sacred for sound. She struck a deal with heaven, one that would demand from her more than any woman should have to give. Give me a son, and I will give him back. This wasn't a bargain. This was surrender. Her prayer wasn't for herself. It was a prophecy, a seed planted in her tears. When the priest finally understood, he offered a simple blessing. But something shifted. She rose, face no longer stained with sorrow. Hope had returned, but with it, a cost. The child came, just as she had believed he would. Samuel, God has heard. But as he grew, so did the ache in her chest. Every coo, every tiny step was a countdown to loss. When he was weaned, still, barely a toddler, she wrapped him in the smallest priestly robe she could sew and brought him to the tabernacle. No tears, no hesitation, only obedience. She left him there, a boy among relics, shadowed by incense and sacred texts. But this wasn't abandonment, it was sacrifice, the kind that echoes louder than any burnt offering. A mother gave up her son, not because she stopped loving him, but because she loved God more. In the holy silence of Shiloh, Samuel began his life not with toys or stories, but with discipline and ritual. The old priest Eli, burdened by failing eyesight and scandal-ridden sons, took Samuel under his wing. The boy was quiet, watchful. He learned not just how to serve, but how to listen. The house of God was corrupted. Eli's sons desecrated it with greed and lust. But Samuel was different. In a world where the sacred had become routine, he still trembled before the presence of God. And then, one night, the silence broke. Samuel, a voice in the dark. He thought it was Eli. He ran to the priest, heart pounding, only to be sent back to bed. Again and again. Until the old man finally realized it wasn't him calling. It was God. And the next time the voice came, Samuel answered the way every soul should when heaven speaks. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. He was just a child, but the message was heavy. Judgment was coming for Eli's house, and it would begin with death. The sins of the priests had gone too far, and this boy, this miracle child, would be the one to carry the blade of prophecy. Morning came, and with it, fear. How do you tell the man who raised you that his lineage is cursed? But Samuel even then didn't flinch from truth. When Eli demanded to know, Samuel delivered every word. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, just honestly. Eli accepted it with a resigned sigh. Perhaps he knew. Perhaps he had always known. But in that moment, Samuel became more than a child. He became a vessel, and the people of Israel would never see him the same again. Word of Samuel spread. Not because he shouted, but because when he spoke, not a single word fell to the ground. His prophecies didn't feel like religion. They felt like thunder. The boy who once knelt quietly in the sanctuary became the voice of God to a nation unraveling. The Philistines were rising. The priests were corrupt. And the ark, the very symbol of God's presence, was about to be taken from them. But Samuel stayed still, listening, waiting, knowing that sometimes silence is a sword sharper than any spear. Then came the war. Israel, desperate and arrogant, brought the ark to the battlefield like a magic charm. They believed it would guarantee victory. Instead, it guaranteed defeat. 30,000 men died. Eli's sons died. The ark was captured. And when news reached Eli, the old man fell backward, broke his neck, and died. The woman who bore Ichabod, "The glory has departed," screamed it with her dying breath. But not Samuel. He didn't scream. He didn't flee. He stayed. He listened. And when God spoke again, Samuel did what few ever could. He rebuilt from the ashes. Years passed. Israel was broken, scattered. But Samuel called them back, not with armies but with conviction. "If you return to the Lord with all your heart," he said, "then rid yourselves of the foreign gods." And they did, not out of fear, but because Samuel's words burned with truth. He led them to Mizpah. They wept. They confessed, and when the Philistines attacked again, Samuel stood between the people and their enemies, not with a sword, but with a lamb. He offered it to God, and the heavens roared in response. The Philistines fled, not because they feared Israel, but because they feared the God who answered Samuel. It was in that thunder that Samuel placed a stone and named it Ebenezer. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. It wasn't a monument to himself, but to a God who speaks when people finally listen. Under Samuel's leadership, Israel didn't just survive. It repented. It healed. And in a time where kings were still a foreign idea, Samuel became the judge, prophet, and spiritual father of a nation. But the peace would not last, because the seeds of ambition were already being planted. And even a prophet cannot stop what a nation demands with its heart. Samuel had grown old. His hair turned silver, his eyes dimmed, but his voice still cut, like wind through dry branches. He appointed his sons as judges, hoping to pass on the mantle. But they were not him. They chased bribes, not justice, and the people noticed. One by one, the elders came to Samuel and asked for what they believed they needed: a king. Like the other nations, it was not just a rejection of Samuel. It was a rejection of the God who had spoken through him all these years. And Samuel, heartbroken, did what he always did in moments of betrayal. He went to God. God's response was chilling in its clarity. "They have not rejected you, Samuel. They have rejected me. But still, the Almighty permitted it. Give them a king," he said, "but warn them first." And Samuel did, standing before the nation like a weary father confronting his rebellious children. He painted a portrait of tyranny, sons conscripted into war, daughters forced into servitude, lands seized, wealth drained. "You will cry out," he said, "but the Lord will not answer you in that day." They did not flinch. Blinded by envy and pride, they wanted crowns over commandments. And so, reluctantly, Samuel obeyed. It was Saul whom God chose, tall, handsome, commanding. A man who looked the part. But God does not see as man sees. And Samuel, though obedient, watched with cautious eyes. He anointed Saul in secret, pouring oil over the man's head and whispering divine purpose into his ears. Signs followed: prophetic ecstasy, public acclamation. For a moment, it seemed Israel had its king and prophet in harmony. But the shadow of warning still lingered in Samuel's heart, for he knew what power does to men who seek it before they understand it. And Saul, for all his might, was still untested. The cracks came quickly. At Gilgal, under the pressure of a panicking army and a looming enemy, Saul broke. He offered a sacrifice himself, a duty reserved for the prophet. When Samuel arrived, he found smoke rising and Saul defending himself with excuses. "I forced myself," Saul said, "because you were late." But Samuel didn't flinch. "You have done foolishly," he said. "Your kingdom could have lasted forever. But now it will be given to another, a man after God's own heart." It was the first blow. Saul had been king for only 2 years. Already heaven had begun to look elsewhere. Time passed and God gave Saul another test, one final chance to prove himself faithful. "Destroy Amalek," came the command. "Leave nothing." It was harsh, but it was also clear. Instead, Saul spared the king, kept the best livestock, and claimed it was all for sacrifice. Samuel came again, eyes sharp, voice thunderous. "To obey is better than sacrifice," he said, "because you have rejected the word of them." "Lord, he has rejected you as king," Saul begged. He clutched Samuel's robe, tore it by accident, and Samuel turned, declaring, "The Lord has torn the kingdom from you this day." It was over. But even when a prophet breaks a man's crown, he still bleeds inside. Samuel wept for Saul, night after night. He had not just anointed him, he had believed in him, even if cautiously. But God intervened again. "How long will you mourn?" he asked. "Go to Bethlehem. I have chosen another." And so Samuel went, carrying oil in secrecy, for Saul was still king, and jealous men kill quickly. In the quiet hills of Jesse's house, he saw sons paraded before him, tall, strong, noble, but none chosen, until David, the youngest, the shepherd, the afterthought, entered the room. God whispered again, "This is the one." And Samuel poured oil on David's head, and in that moment, destiny awakened. Unlike Saul's coronation, David's anointing was hidden, but the power was no less real. From that day, the Spirit of God rushed upon David and departed from Saul. Samuel returned to Ramah and watched from afar as Saul unraveled. Madness crept into the king's soul like fog through a broken gate. Tormented by evil spirits, enraged by David's rising popularity, Saul became a man ruled not by God, but by fear. And still, Samuel did not intervene. His silence was judgment enough. When David fled from Saul's wrath, he found Samuel once more, being the prophet who had once whispered greatness into his ears. Together they went to Naioth. But Saul sent soldiers to capture David, and something strange happened. The Spirit of God fell upon them, and they began to prophesy. Saul sent more men, and the same happened. Finally, Saul came himself. But the Spirit overwhelmed him too. He stripped his robes and prophesied, lying exposed before Samuel. It was divine irony. The rejected king, naked and powerless before the prophet who had first anointed him. Yet even this spectacle could not heal Saul's soul. Samuel would never again stand beside Saul in power. His last act with the fallen king was not in court but in confrontation. After Saul's final disobedience, Samuel never returned to him again. The prophet who had crowned him walked away, not out of hatred, but out of finality. Saul's story would end in chaos. Samuel's voice would no longer guide him. The silence between them became its own prophecy. And then quietly, Samuel died. All Israel mourned. Even David, now hunted, felt the loss like the tearing of a veil. The last great judge, the first great prophet, was gone. But Samuel's story did not end in the grave. In one of the Bible's most haunting moments, Saul, desperate, abandoned, and facing death, sought a medium to summon Samuel's spirit. When the old prophet appeared, even the medium screamed. Samuel's voice cut through death itself. "Why do you ask me when the Lord has turned from you?" He told Saul plainly, "Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me." And so it was. On the battlefield of Gilboa, Saul fell on his sword, and the kingdom passed into David's hands. But it had all begun with a mother's prayer. Hannah's tears in the tabernacle had birthed more than a son. They birthed a voice, one that would thunder across generations, cut through kings, and speak judgment with tenderness and truth. Samuel was not just a prophet, he was a mirror, to Eli, to Saul, to Israel itself. He reflected what they were, and what they refused to become. And though he never wore a crown, his words shaped those who did. His was a life of obedience, when others chose power, of silence when others shouted, of clarity when others lied. And in that, Samuel became something more than a man. He became a legacy,